Welcome back to my Proxmox project video, I guess, series at this point, if that's what you want to call it. Um, so far, what I've done is I've set up Proxmox on an older HP server that I have running here in my home lab, and there's I guess a handful of things, maybe I don't know, two or three things that I've done, so far off camera that I figure I may as well explain. So the couple things that I've done is the first thing, just to make sure that my network here inside the house is running and I use UniFi hardware. I set up my UniFi controller as an LXC container. LXC is the container system that Proxmox uses versus something like Docker. LXC is the Docker system that Proxmox uses. So I've set up my UniFi controller software inside of a container inside of Proxmox, and I've got that running. So this guy right here, you can kind of see we set to have it 2.5 gigs of memory, has a static IP of 5.100, and then if we take a look here, we can see that indeed I have the whole UniFi web front end for all my stuff here on the network. So that's done. That's a pretty easy process. I basically just went and found somebody that had a process online. I just Googled it and did UniFi controller LXC. Was able to find it. No big deal. That's up and running. The other thing that I've done is I've actually added a Synology NAS that I have inside the house as a storage location on inside of Proxmox. And basically I designated that it can hold VM disks for the VMs that I create, and then ISO images that I download or want to use for different services or servers that I run here on the network. So I can upload those ISO images, and that's done not in the server view up here. It is done in the storage view. And then if you go to data center, you can actually go to the storage tab that you'll see here. These are the different storage locations that Proxmox can access and utilize. And I just went ahead and added my NAS right here. There's a little bit of configuration involved. I won't get into it. It's not super technical. You just need to set up a share on the NAS and then do some configurations and then add it inside of Proxmox, and no big deal. You can also specify what type of content that it can hold, and like I mentioned, it holds disk images for the VMs that I create, as well as the ISO images that I want to use for creating new servers and such. And finally, the last thing that I went ahead and did is I actually made a blog post on my website about this, but I set up a new Ubuntu server installation. And what I did is I went ahead and kind of sysprep that. I know sysprep is a Windows term, but set this server so when I redeploy it, it's kind of back to square one. It doesn't have a host name that's specific and all those kinds of things. Everything's reset kind of back to square one. But I can deploy it very easily rather than having to, reinstall the operating system via, the ISO or whatever you want to do. So my plan for today is that I am going to be setting up a Docker server using Ubuntu server. And then on top of that, my plan is that I'm going to run Portainer. And Portainer is a web-based GUI to manage all of those Docker containers. And again, obviously I mentioned earlier that Proxmox has a built-in container system, LXC, but I decided that I'd like to use Docker as well, and I'm going to use an Ubuntu server for that. Like I mentioned, I made an actual template out of an Ubuntu server installation that I made. It's probably last week. So the process of creating this Ubuntu server from the template is really pretty straightforward inside of Proxmox. And you can do this, same thing inside of VMware. It's kind of the same function, but we find our template that I've created, which is right here. And you'll notice when I deploy this new server, the icon is going to be different. This is a template little page with computer. And then we just do clone. Okay, so the server did deploy, and the template deployed a new server. And actually what I did off camera there is I went ahead and deleted the initial server that I deployed, and I redeployed it except with an ID of 150. The reason I did that is just for identification purposes inside my network. I know that this particular server is going to end in .50 because I'm going to give it a static IP when it's all set up and ready to go. Additionally, what I'm going to go ahead and do is extend the size of this hard disk that's attached to it from 65 to 100 gigs. I don't think I'll necessarily use that, but now's the time to do it, so I may as well go ahead and do that. So I'll go ahead and select the disk right here, and we're going to resize it, and I'm going to size increment, so I'm going to add 35 gigs, something like that. We're going to resize it, and now we're up to 100 gigs, so that's good. So really, I mean, everything is set to go. 10 gigs of RAM, 100 gig hard drive, 4 CPUs, and I know that it's going to be .50. So we're going to go ahead and start it. I like the way Proxmox works with the console option here. It's just built right into the whole thing. We just go ahead and hit start now. It's going to ask me if I want to start it. I'll go ahead and select yes. And again, keep in mind that this server was deployed from a template, like I mentioned earlier. So there really is going to be no initial configuration of the OS at this point, and it should start up pretty quickly. So we'll let this go ahead and do that, and here we are at the login screen. So you'll notice that the host name here is just a bunch of random letters and numbers, and that's because of the script that I ran against it before I created the template out of it. We're ultimately going to have to go ahead and, or for my purposes anyways, I'm going to go ahead and rename that to something else. So we're logged in to use PuTTY to connect to these machines. This console, built-in console, actually works pretty dang well. But personally, I guess I just like to use PuTTY for doing all the kind of command line work. Okay, so I made a mistake, and I realized that I was not recording audio when I was looking at the PuTTY terminal or any other scene than you see right here. So just as a quick recap, basically what we've done so far is we've set up the template. I've went ahead and renamed the host name on the server to something that is identifiable to me, and in this case it's Ubuntu Docker server. And then the next thing that we're doing is we're setting an IP address, a static IP address on the server. I'm not going to use DHCP on it. You certainly can. It's up to you, just what I'm choosing to do. So if we look at the PuTTY terminal that I have connected to this machine, and right now it's .154, there's a couple things that you need to do with Ubuntu server in order to get this done. So the first would be to find the existing interfaces on this server, and that's using the command IP space link, and that'll show you right now the two interfaces that are on this server. We got a loopback and we have the ENS18, which is what we're dealing with. And then what we need to do is we need to find out the YAML config name in order to be able to edit it and change it. And that is going to be by listing the contents of etc net plan, and you're going to see in this case 00-installer-config.yaml net plan. What's in here? 00-installer-config. So I just hit tab after I had typed out -net plan. We hit enter, and now you're going to see the contents of this file, and you're going to see DHCP4 set to true. We are going to obviously want to set that to false. So we'll set that to false. I'm just going to go ahead and get a copy of what this should look like. I am going to just paste it in here for now. So we are going to paste that. So you're going to see the first few lines are about the same. Version 2, Ethernets, and this is the network name, or the interface name, and we're going to actually want to change that to ENS18. Like you see there, DHCP no. Addresses, in this case, we are going to change this to 10.50.5.0, not 0. We're going to change this to 50. Gateway, which is 10.50.5.1, and we can leave the name servers as Google. That's perfectly fine. So, since now we have a new kind of cleaned up version here, delete the old config out. This is the interface, ENS18, no DHCP. We're going to set it to 5.50. At this point, it's pretty much done. We're going to hit save, which is Control X, yes. Save over the top, and then we are going to reboot one more time. All right, so I'm just going to use the console in here, and if with any luck, when we do ifconfig, yep, so we should now have 5.50 as our IP address, subnet mask 255.255.255.0. Next, let me get PuTTY fired back up here since we changed the IP. We have now a server that has a new host name. We renamed it. And then we also went ahead and assigned it a static IP. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to install Docker. And Docker is just a system that will allow you to run containers on this server. And there's plenty of documentation on how to do this. I'm using it actually from docker.com. Usually if you just Google install Docker Ubuntu server 20 or 21 or whatever you might be using, you can pretty easily find instructions on how to do that. And I'll have some more in the blog post. But right now, I am going to use, the instructions that I have, sudo apt-get update. There we go. So we're going to run that guy, and then we're going to run this command. Apt-get install CA certificates curl there, and then we're going to add the Docker GPG key. We're going to actually install the Docker engine. In fact, I thought it was just sudo apt get install docker.io. Yeah. So I don't know, this is the way I've done it before, so I'm just going to do sudo apt-get install docker.io, default of yes. Go ahead and let that install. All right, and then with any luck here, sudo docker run hello world. So that should be done. The next thing that we want to do is install Docker Compose. Docker Compose version, we should get Docker Compose installed. So now we have Docker installed and we have Docker Compose installed. And now what I think we can actually do is install Portainer, which is a web-based GUI management console for Docker. All right, so now to install Portainer, so we're going to create a volume for Docker, and the permission denied there is the fact that it's there's no sudo in front of that. So that went ahead and created the data for the container for volume for the Portainer data. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. Oh, need a sudo in front of that. And that's all good. And now what we should be able to do is we should be able to hit, this is going to run on port 9000. So we should be able to hit the static IP that we put, so 10.50.5.50 port 9000. And with any luck, we get the Portainer web interface. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create a password here. I'm going to create it. This is actually going to manage the local Docker environment. We're going to connect, and we should be good to go. Yeah, looks like that was got installed pretty easy. Click into the user, or not click into the user, click into the local endpoint. Now I haven't used this a ton. The concept is still pretty much the same. I did run an older version of this a while back, but this time I'm really going to try to learn this a bit better. I know for a fact that you can go into this app templates section and just get some kind of real, some pretty easily accessible. If you wanted to run a WordPress container, you can do that. They're basically just one-click installations, which is really pretty dang cool. So if I wanted to run a MySQL instance, I just select MySQL. I name it whatever I want. I'll just name it MySQL. We'll make a root password for this, and we just hit deploy. And as it deploys, and there we go. Got a MySQL instance, MySQL container up and running that I could use for databases or whatever. If I wanted to delete it, we can select the actual container, hit remove, and now it's gone. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. By no means an expert. I'm still learning. I'm still trying to learn these things, but basically, in the span of, I don't know how long this is, about 30 minutes, and this is me kind of stumbling around periodically. I've set up an Ubuntu server from a template I created. I installed Docker. I installed Docker Compose, and then I installed Portainer rather, which is the web-based GUI interface for the Docker server. So at this point, I really have two options. I can use the built-in LXC stuff inside of Proxmox, or I can use Portainer to create containers, on my actual Docker server. And there are so many different containers that you can run in an automated fashion. It's insane. I'm hoping to learn some more about those things. But overall, not a hard process. I'm sure if I can do it, you can do it. And so I think that's going to be it for the video today. Next, I think I'm going to work on a couple containers that I want to run and get those set up and working. And then I'm actually going to be creating a home media server here for my network as well, using Ubuntu server and that same template that we use to deploy the Docker server. So thanks for spending the time, and I guess we'll catch you on the next one.